I'm Mary Jane Rust, and this is Emphasis, a program we hope will keep you up to date on what's happening in the arts in our region. Today we're going to do an unusual kind of Emphasis program. It's really a tribute to a local painter, Archie Musick, and more than a painter, an author and a general all-about wonderful man who died very suddenly a short time ago. And we have some people with us in the studio who can tell us some interesting and intimate details, including part of his family. On my far right is Dan Musick, Archie's son. Welcome, Dan. You're no stranger to Emphasis, of course.
Not now.
Some people may remember that you've played the bagpipe for us. And next to him is Pat Musick, Archie's daughter. And Pat, welcome.
Good to be here.
You're spending some time in England, I understand.
Yes, I've been studying there, but I'm back here for a while.
Wonderful. Well, it's a thrill to have you with us today because we're going to hear a lot about your father, I'm sure, through people who know best. Okay. And on my left, Lillian McCue, also certainly no stranger to Emphasis. And Lillian, you're always popping up in a different...
with a different hat on.
Yes, right. Fine. Welcome once again. Next to Lillian is Mr. Henry Clausen, local bookstore operator and very well-known man about town who knew Archie very well, and he's going to tell us some interesting things about Archie. And last but certainly not least, Mrs. Charles Hathaway. And Mrs. Hathaway knew Archie, I guess, longer than anyone else here.
I think perhaps.
Yes.
Well, except for Mr. Clausen, we met just about the same time.
All right, fine. Well, welcome to all of you to Emphasis. We're very pleased to have you. Let's get started first with the segment of the family over here, and tell us a little bit about your father, Dan, and what you would like to say. What do you feel his legacy is to this town, this community?
Well, it's hard to say. There is. He taught here for about 30 years or somewhat over that.
Taught what?
He taught art in the Cheyenne Mountain School District, and every now and then we keep on running into someone who say, "Oh, you're Archie Musick's kids." That I had a class from him X number of years ago.
Right.
And it's only within the last few years that he has started becoming well-known outside of town, but especially since the retrospective show at the Art Center opened up, we've gone around looking at the tags around all of these paintings that we haven't seen in years and years because they were sold a long time ago.
Owned by other people, yes, of course.
And we find that there are people who have been collecting his work and so forth and just not so much.
I have a feeling that must have been for you to discover that.
Yeah, it is. It's quite a thrill just to be able to see the pictures again anyway.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, Pat, we're actually going to look at some of the pictures. We have a few of them in the studio with us, 4, I believe. So
yes.
I'd like to ask you, if you would, to tell us about each one as we catch them on camera.
Certainly.
If you would do that.
Right.
It'll take just a second, and we'll have one on camera.
Okay.
And then perhaps you can tell us about them. There's one.
This is the last picture that he finished, just a few days before he died, in fact. It's called Picasso Climbs Druid Arch. It's related to a few earlier paintings he'd done, which we will show later on in the program, using Picasso-esque forms in combination with the strange rock formations in the southwest, with which he was completely entranced for years and years.
He used, what medium is that, that particular painting?
This particular painting is in a medium that he developed himself, basically egg tempera colored pencils. The emulsion is beeswax and egg yolk and turpentine.
Sounds like something to eat rather than to...
Well, it's not that tasty.
I guess not.
He was always willing to teach this technique, but he figured that most people these days didn't have enough patience to go through with it.
I see.
It's very long and involved, but it was very enjoyable for him to do.
Well,
he developed it with the help of Thomas Hart Benton.
I see.
When he was working on a WPA project.
Oh, back in those days.
Back in those days.
Yes, we could do a whole program on that someday. That's a very interesting era in the arts. I think we have another one here that we can look at. There's another one. Pat, tell us about that.
This one is called Winter Night Frolic. And Dad was very fond of ice skating. He grew up ice skating in Missouri during the winter. He was also intrigued with the idea of skeletons getting up and having a good time on
Kind of a danse
cold
macabre.
He mentioned once that he would, if he had to be buried, he would like to be next to a lake so that he'd be able to get up and
Is that right?
keep his hand in.
In addition, he had a sister who collected ghost stories, so
I see.
sort of ran in the family, this
Yes.
intrigue with spirits.
Right. Now, was that the same medium as the one before?
Yes, it was.
Did he work mostly in that medium? Or?
He did from the time he developed it.
I see.
Yes. I think we have
We have
an
another
earlier
one.
one on now.
Let's get this one on. There.
This one is called Wood Choppers, and it's related to, I don't know whether it's a sketch for or a painting done after a WPA mural for Red Cloud, Nebraska. And it shows, probably better than any other painting we've got, the influence of Benton on his style. It was right around that time that he was studying with him.
I see. Lovely, vivid colors.
Yes.
Yes. Very good. Well, I think we just have one more painting, and then we'll talk about some other things. There's the last one, Pat.
Right, the last one is really the first, because this is the earliest painting of his that we have. It was 1927, and it's a view of Glen Erie. When he was out here having ridden freights and who knows what all, traveling around the country as a young man, he was very intrigued with exploring around in the hills and Glen Erie and so forth. This is in oil, and it's certainly quite different from what his style evolved into.
Yes. That's very interesting. Well, Mrs. Hathaway, let's move to you for just a moment, since you are one of our oldest touches with Archie's life, and tell us a little bit about your connection with him and how did you meet him and so forth.
Well, we first met Archie in about 1927, 26 it could have been. And then he lived with us the winter of 1928 and 29.
And that was here in Colorado Springs?
Here in Colorado Springs, that's right, on North Corona Street when we lived there. And our child was very small, and she's always just adored Archie. So he would teach her words to speak and carry her around. And at that time, Archie used to ride a bicycle, and he would go out and make sketches and bring them back on the bicycle. And then sometimes he would take his painting and a canvas and go out and paint out there in the wherever he was painting. As a matter of fact, we have a couple of ones that were done in 1928 there on the show up at the Art Center now.
Here at our Fine Arts Center?
Yes, and a drawing also that belongs to us. But he used to take his bicycle and go out in the middle of the night to the Garden of the Gods and play the ocarina. We had an old Victrola, and he loved to play the Lonesome Road and the Big Rock Candy Mountain, those things on there.
Yes, yes.
And one of the first times we saw Archie was at the Broadmoor Art Academy used to have balls every once a year, and costume balls. And so in those days it was quite risque, but Archie dressed in tuxedo pants and a tuxedo tie. And that was his costume. And of course it created a lot of comment. I can't remember whether he won first prize or not.
Yes, yes, of course.
Very interesting.
Yes.
And then may I say something a little bit later about, a little bit later on in his life?
Yes, of course, we'll get back to you again. Thank you, thank you. Mr. Clausen, you told me before we went on the air an interesting, how you met Archie. I think that's kind of interesting. I think maybe our people would like to hear that story.
Well, I would have to put it this way. I met him before I saw him. I had just gotten up the Manitou Incline, and this is back in 1926.
All right.
And started off in the woods, and about a half an hour later, I heard a lot of sounds, and I recognized him. Well, something was from La Traviata and something from Aida. Anyway, it was a robust voice, and he was practically almost on pitch most of the time. So I headed his way, and in fact, and while I was heading his way, I started singing with him too. That was compounding the felony.
Was it in fact a duet? Was it in fact a duet?
Well, no, but
You just
I
joined
think
in.
we surprised each other.
Yes.
So that was a good start, because he was in those early days more of an opera fan than he perhaps was later on. That was pleasantly incidental, but that's the beginning of our acquaintanceship. And then
Certainly never lost his interest in vocal music, though,
by
because
no means.
yes.
So that started us off on a very good footing, and then so many things developed after that that I could use an entire program of my own.
Oh, well, we'll give you another shot at it a little bit later.
He was at that time studying, if I remember rightly, at the Art Center, and Randall Davy was there then. And he was doing very well, I thought. He, you know, for a while he had done what we called in those days lightning paintings that were taught by home self-proclaimed Michelangelos who drew pictures in drugstore windows and then sold them for $1.50. But anyway, it didn't hurt him any to learn that, because what was basically important, that was certainly in there.
Well,
that type of painting.
I suppose a real artist is able to filter what he needs from any source and incorporate it into his own. Yes.
And from then on, we had in a certain sense, were inseparable for many years, and we barnstormed all over the country. And in fact, there are some episodes there that are best left in the background.
When you say barnstormed, what do you really mean by that?
Well, that is really let us say, an itinerant prize fighter or an itinerant peddler of goods. He barnstorms around the country, and
I see.
Carnival shows that have no particular definite booking, but play wherever town will let them come in there.
I see.
That's barnstorming. So they were not on the solid basis like Barnum and Bailey would be. You see,
I see.
They were known long before they got there.
All right.
As I say, I have here enough for another 10 minutes of exercise.
Right.
Excerpts, but I'd better cut them short for a moment.
We'll see if we have time to get back to you, all right? Fine.
There's one particular one I would like to tell, because we both landed in jail.
Don't let me forget it. Okay. Well, go ahead and take the time now.
Well, anyway, Archie's sister Ruth was over in Arizona, and we decided to go over and visit her. We both had money in our pockets. I was married. And so we grabbed a freight train in the Southern Pacific Yards in Los Angeles, and we got over there sometime the next day. Anyway, we stayed there a couple of days and coming back. And then at that time, Upton Sinclair was running for governor. And I can't remember the name of the Republican incumbent. Is that the name for the one who was already in? Anyway, Frank something, and he was a staunch Long Beach Republican. So the Los Angeles Times, which ran the show, had a chart in there every day of migrations arriving and so forth. And their story was that Upton Sinclair become governor, and every bum in America will come to town to live for free off the hobo's paradise.
Oh, dear.
So Archie and I became numbers on the police docket, because we got off the freight train. The minute we got off railroad property, got across the street on the sidewalk, within a matter of 3 seconds from somewhere appeared a car, unmarked, with 2 detectives in it. We were picked up, and where have you been, and so forth. Anyway, we were kept overnight in the Lincoln Heights jail, and not without some protest from both of us, which showed that we were young enough to argue with the policeman. Yes. So the next morning we let out at 5:30 and went home.
That's a good story.
And as I say, we became a number on a historical chart, the roster of tramps.
Oh, that's wonderful. Lillian, you said that you were a later friend of Archie Musick, that you've had quite a few extensive dealings with him.
I have very warm memories of Archie. I had admired him and admired his work from afar, as it were, and did some very shrewd deals at the Outdoor Art Show. Because at 2 of the shows, I bought a Musick, and I still treasure them. They're both birds. There's a tree with a little bluebird in it, and another tree, a cedar tree, with a little red bird in it. But it was not until we came together in music that we learned to love one another, just like you, Henry, because you love the people you sing with. loved watching Archie take part in the Gilbert and Sullivan shows of the Colorado Springs Music Theater. I'll never forget him as a gentleman of Japan. Our attitude's queer and quaint, he sang. You're wrong if you think it ain't. Well, it was, believe me, queer and quaint. And then we came together in the Colorado Springs Chorale.
Yes.
And it makes me very happy to think that the one thing Archie wanted to do was to take part in the Beethoven Ninth Symphony with Charles Ansbacher and the symphony this last February, and he did it.
Yes.
We sang together and clasped hands without words afterwards. It was so wonderful. It's one of the things I wanted to do too, and I'm glad that I lived to do it.
Well, that was a wonderful triumph for everyone involved, I think.
We felt it was.
Yes. Pat, we have some slides, I understand, and maybe we could look at those and you can guide us through. How would
Let's
that be?
do that.
All right. There's the first one.
Well, this is an illustration of one of the quatrains out of the Rubaiyat. Dan?
The Rubaiyat, Omar Khayyam, most people are probably familiar with it. It's a Persian poem that Dad was very fond of, a series of poems.
Yes.
A moment's halt, a momentary taste of being from the well amid the waste, and lo, the phantom caravan has reached the nothing it set out from. Oh, make haste. This is the second or third version he did. It's sort of illustration of one of his favorite poems.
This is called Homestead, and we've just put it on as an example of Dad's whimsy.
That is whimsical.
This is Goblin Valley, Utah, where Dad went camping a few happy times, particularly when he went with a friend of his who was also a teacher and photographer. He realized what would blend in very well with all these strange rock formations. And so he set about using Goblin Valley in a few paintings. This is Picasso Rides in Goblin Valley, Utah. You can see the little centaur down there in the corner. That's representing Picasso. But so many of the sculptural forms and the rock formations, there was practically no dissimilarity. They might as well all be part of the landscape. And so he did a few of these whimsical but well, make you sit up and take notice as well.
Yes, they certainly do.
Big mouse, little lion. Let's see. There's a little corner of the lion's head down in the bottom
Can
there.
we get that a little bigger?
No, we have a problem when we try to show slides on TV, so we just have to sort of do the best we can.
Right. Well, he loved animal forms and old stumps and plant forms and so forth. Now, why he's got a huge mouse on the top of a log and a little tiny lion down in the bottom, I don't know.
Well, that's
I don't know whether
whimsical.
there's a story behind it or whether he just decided, was playing around with sketches and did it that way.
Yes.
Okay, this is the archaeologist. He did quite a number, really, of pictures based on archaeologists or prospectors or a little man off in the wasteland someplace and all the fascinating rock formations with, bits and pieces left behind by former civilizations. Up in the upper left corner you can see carving on the face of the rock. In the rock formation itself is a suggestion of a skull. This is brought up even more in this next one. You can't quite see the skull there, but just in case you miss it, it's titled Skullduggery. This has the investigator of the past, and that was never one of Dad's official passions, but he was always tremendously interested in the vanished cultures and so forth. Up in the corner there is not only the skull, but the ruin itself within the skull.
Yes.
This is Park Avenue West. It's a formation in Arches National Monument, National Park now.
The Arches, yes.
And, well, again, he loved that country and that kind of big sweeping sky. This is a cavern actually, it's the New Mexico room, I believe, in Carlsbad Caverns.
Oh, yes.
It's still not open to the public. But when Dad was working there in the 30s, he and a few other people who were working there made a clandestine trip, exploration. And he was so enchanted by this underground lake that nothing would do but he had to take off his clothes and go swimming in it and pick out all the rock crystals in the sunlight the next morning.
Oh, how wonderful.
This is another illustration of a poem. Coleridge, Kubla Khan. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. This is in Monument Valley here outside the Springs. The umbrella rock formations inspired a painting, or several paintings, and also a children's book.
There's the painting.
There's the painting.
Yes.
This is just a ghost building. Another fascination. This is called If Trees Were People.
How fierce.
Well, there was a cynical side to Dad's nature as well, and he was a little worried about the direction the world is going, and this is one expression of it.
This is the Haunted Palace. It's loosely an illustration of Edgar Allan Poe's poem about the haunted palace, but you look closely, you can see Dad's face worked in there in front of the palace, which is also the house that he built. All the little imps and creatures rushing around represented pretty much the destructive spirits of modern art. He had nothing against modern art as such, but he felt that especially in his classes there were turning up more and more people who had no regard for all the basics that
all that went before.
That's right.
Yes, yes.
This is called Architect Consumed by Materials. This is a door that was carved as a summer project. It's a little hard to see this figure that's made out of a hillside here. That was a fantasy in which the whole landscape took part.
Is that a painting, Pat?
It is a painting also.
Yes.
It's an earlier one. Technique is slightly different, but basically the same. This is another favorite stump. This one's on an island in Yellowstone. This is an abstraction in nature, also in Utah, and this is a painting inspired by it. This is a painting from an early adventure, in fact, from the age of 2, when my father was set off across the ice in search of what he thought was a burning haystack. It turned out to be a sunset.
And this is from another of the quatrains from the Rubaiyat. Whether at Naishapur or Babylon, whether the cup with sweet or bitter run, the wine of life keeps oozing drop by drop. The leaves of life keep falling one by one. He did the first of, I think, 2 Wine of Life paintings shortly after Pat's and my mother died in 1969. And except for the 3 who are with us here today and a few others scattered about, Dad found with Mom and then his sister, and one by one, faster and faster, it seemed, people were leaving the stage.
Yes, yes.
Well, this is the last of the slides we've got here,
All right.
called Nostalgia.
All right. And that's the one we're going to show in a special way, isn't it? All right. Well,
That's right.
we'll see if we can work that out. Okay. Mrs. Hathaway, you had something else you wanted to say.
Well, I wanted to say that Archie used to write these children's stories and make illustrations, and he used our child as a sounding board because he thought that she had good taste, I guess, and if she liked the stories, other children would too. And so he was teaching in a girls' college back in Missouri at the time she was married, but he made the trip out to her wedding and brought her a beautiful painting, incidentally, which I think is her pride and joy. And so then, after he'd been back in Missouri for a short time, he wrote and he said, well, he Carol's wedding had inspired him, so he thought it was about time that he got married. So he met the lovely ceramics teacher at the University of Missouri. She was teaching there, and so they were married. And Dan and Patty, of course, are their children.
Yes, yes. Well, how nice.
So, of course, we've known Archie so many, many years, and we saw him just a few days before he died.
Well, thank you very much. Lillian, you've written something very special, and I would like to take this moment now for you to read that to Archie.
I'll be very happy to. I felt honored that I was asked to commemorate what Archie was, and this is how we see him. He was made for the pen of Walt Whitman, with a head fit for Mount Rushmore, and a heart as big as all outdoors, as big as America's heartland that bore him, footloose, smasher of precedents, flouter of fashion. He was real, and what was real belonged to him. He shaped his hearth out of the living rock, firm-founded, glowing and sure, a charmed circle for a woman and 2 children, and for friends who came to bask in the warmth of the fire in the rock and the living fire of his heart. He was a smiler and a twinkler. Many a quiet chuckle he shared with his pipe, and many an impudent guffaw he offered to a startled world. The human comedy delighted him, without bitterness or malice. He saw sharply, and he saw deep, and what he saw, his hand painted. What he saw on the surface, sharply, and what he saw under the surface, deep. Was that real? As real as the dreams of the human spirit. And he knew those dreams, that they were the stuff of truth. This is his legacy. This is what he has left us, in paint and in words, the certainty that our dreams are real and endure.
Very, very nice. Thank you. Thank you, Lillian. That's lovely. It's been an unusual day for us on Emphasis, and one that I hope will set, even though you mentioned Archie Musick as a smasher of precedents, I hope it will set a precedent. I think that might be a very important thing to do. And certainly it's been our pleasure to present this little vignette, really, of Archie Musick, very important local artist, and I want to thank all of you for being our guests today and helping to paint a picture of this very important local artist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.